The restraints on the medical table shattered as Captain Thorne's scream turned from a sound of agony into a pulse of pure, stabilizing energy. Glass in the observation bay spider-webbed, and the Xylari medics were thrown back by a physical concussive wave. For a heartbeat, the room was blindingly white. Then, silence. If you have ever wondered what happens when the impossible meets the inevitable, you're in the right place. Subscribe to witness the rise of the Terran anomaly. Now, let's see where the wreckage truly began. A week ago, the hardest decision Julian Thorne had faced was whether to skip breakfast before his shift on the Solstice Aegis. He had been a man of routine, a pilot who preferred the predictable hum of sublight engines to the chaos of the frontier. Now, that life was a memory of fire and twisted titanium. Vespera watched the human from behind the safety of a reinforced thermal barrier. On her Xylari data tablet, a jagged crimson line tracked Thorne's heart rate, or what remained of it. The serum was a shimmering, viscous gold, circulating through the human's veins like liquid sunlight. It was never intended for a carbon-based nervous system. In fact, by all Xylari medical logic, the human should have dissolved into a slurry of unraveled proteins hours ago. But he didn't. Vespera's 4 eyes narrowed as she adjusted the settings on her tablet. The device was an elegant sliver of obsidian, originally used to log Thorne's inevitable biological failure, but the data it returned now made no sense. Instead of a rejection, Thorne's cells were performing a hostile takeover of the alien chemistry. It was as if his mitochondria had looked at the hyper-advanced serum, recognized its power, and decided to enslave it. "He is rewriting the sequence," the chief surgeon hissed, his voice a series of dry clicks. Vespera didn't answer. She couldn't. She was too busy watching the human's muscle fibers knit back together with a density that should have snapped his own bones. The Xylari were a species of poets and architects. They viewed biology as a delicate garden to be tended. Humans, it seemed, viewed it as a fortification to be upscaled. 36 hours passed in a blur of monitoring and disbelief. The spire remained quiet, tucked away in the nebula's embrace, until the long-range scanners let out a mournful, rhythmic chime. Void-sworn raiders, the scavengers who had gutted the Solstice Aegis, had followed the trail of debris to the Xylari's door. Have you ever seen a peaceful culture realize they brought a predator into their sanctuary just as the wolves arrive at the gate? Thorne's eyes snapped open. There was no grogginess, no slow climb to consciousness. He simply transitioned from a state of repair to a state of total readiness. He sat up, the remaining shards of the magnetic restraints falling from his wrists like discarded jewelry. He looked at Vespera, then at the glowing Xylari data tablet in her trembling hands. "How long?" His voice was a low growl, vibrating with a resonance that wasn't entirely human. 2 days, Vespera managed to whisper. "Captain, you must lie down. The integration is only 60% complete. Your neural pathways are 60% is plenty," Thorne interrupted, swinging his legs off the table. He stood, and for the first time, Vespera felt the true weight of a species that specialized in the impossible. The Raiders' scanners wouldn't have picked up the change in the spire's energy signature. They were too busy savoring the kill. Their lead frigate, a jagged shard of obsidian known as the Pale Hook, drifted into the upper atmosphere with the arrogance of a predator that had already won. Vespera watched Thorne move. It wasn't the movement of a recovering patient. Every step he took was a calculation. He didn't ask for permission. He simply reached out and took the Xylari data tablet from her hands. His fingers, still stained with the gold of the serum, tapped against the glass with a terrifying rhythmic speed. He was essentially performing a biological overclock of the spire's systems. By routing the serum's remaining energetic bypass through the research drones, he wasn't just launching sensors, he was weaving a web. "They rely on synchronized shield harmonics," Thorne said, his eyes never leaving the data streams. "The Void-sworn are precise, they're predictable. They think because we're fragile, we'll play by the rules of engagement." He tapped a final command. Outside, a swarm of 300 research drones, tiny harmless specks designed for atmospheric sampling, screamed into the void. The pale hook fired its main battery. The beam should have vaporized the spire's landing strut. Instead, it hit a pocket of ionized air and refracted, the energy dissipating into a harmless aurora. And now, in the shadow of the spire, under the looming threat of the raider fleet, the climax arrived. Thorn didn't fire a single weapon. He didn't have any. Instead, he triggered the drone swarm. A pulse of pure electromagnetic interference shattered the raider's shield timing. It wasn't a hit. It was a psychological lobotomy. The pale hook lurched, its systems screaming as Thorn vented a cloud of ionized particles. To the raider's sensors, the single Xylari spire suddenly transformed into a ghost fleet of 20 Earth-standard heavy cruisers, all broadcasting false distress signals that sounded like a trap. The raiders broke. They didn't just retreat. They scattered into the nebula, paralyzed by the sudden appearance of a human threat they couldn't quantify. They had come for scraps. They found a nightmare. Thorn exhaled, a long, ragged sound. His knees buckled, and he collapsed back onto the medical table. The Xylari data tablet slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. Vesper rushed to his side, but as she checked his vitals, her 4 eyes widened in a new kind of awe. The serum hadn't just saved him, it had permanently optimized his neural pathways. He was no longer just a pilot. He was a bridge between what humanity was and what they could become. Vespera picked up the Xylari data tablet. Once, it had been a ledger of his death. Now, as she looked at the commands he'd burned into the spire's core, it was a blueprint for a new era. The Xylari Collective would no longer look at Earth as a curiosity. They would look at them as peers. Thorn looked up at the ceiling, a faint, defiant smile touching his lips. The tablet's screen flickered, displaying the final tactical log. Unpredictable. High risk. The galaxy has always been a dangerous place, but maybe it's time the shadows learn to be afraid of us. Would you like to see what happens when the raiders finally reach Earth's orbital defense grid? Or should we explore the secret the Xylari found?